From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Deckens. Most importantly, you are here. And that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Maybe today we start with a question. What is here? Where are we? Where are you? Are we in the same universe? Are we in an alternate one? Are we creations of fact? Are we creations of fiction? And what are we in turn creating? What's the line between fact and fiction? And what happens when a game gets out of hand? Longtime listeners, fellow conspiracy realists, you know that your three faithful correspondents here are all big fans of games. We're all, I think it's safe to say, fans of things that other people might consider weird. You know, whether we're talking about modern folklore, whether we're talking about, what was that episode we did a long time, not too long ago, about the alternate reality game in California? Remember you'd slide down?
Oh, yeah. It was like a weird kind of psychedelic techie scavenger hunt. Mm-hmm. There was like a pinball machine or something that opened up, or like there were old weird video games with like, you know, what do they call those old like tube TV kind of things, like a Commodore 64. No, I know what it was. It was an arcade cabinet. It would be like this hidden arcade you'd find, and then you'd play the game, and it would be this like rabbit thing that would come up and give you clues as to how to find the secret mystical room.
Amazing. Yeah, we also looked at the company that created it and found all the other ARGs they had created in the past, and super cool concept that the company came up with, and had writers who created it and people who created the machines and created the clues. So it's very neat that a group of people can get together and make something like that.
The Jejune Institute. That was one of these. And we want to thank again the creators of some of those ARGs for taking the time to write to the show and give us an insider look at this. We were able to explore those this way because those games had ended. So we weren't violating what the world of wrestling would call kayfabe. But we're going deeper into something like this. We're exploring the strange agglomeration of fact and fiction, and the at times dangerous story of something called Ong's Hat. If you're a longtime denizen of the internet, or you hang out in underground bookstores known for their zines, then you may already be aware of this. But here are the facts. First things first, we have to tell you, Ong's Hat is not, right now, it's not a hat that's circulating around, right? It is instead the name of a former town out in Burlington County, New Jersey, Pine Barren country. It's a ghost town nowadays.
Supposedly, it's a small ghost town. Right? There's so many things that Ong's Hat could be, or may have been. Theoretically, it's a ghost town out there in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah. Shout out already to Sopranos and the X-Files. You know what? It's a good point. Right now, if you look at maps as recently as 2006 or so, you'll see remnants of human construction. Ruins, brick foundations, an old shed, sometimes described as a hut. But calling it a town on our part is pretty generous. The history of this place, according to the official records in this universe, it dates back to well before the Revolutionary War. It has also become home to one of the very first conspiracy theories grown on the internet. And there's something, I think we should have some historical context, again, from our universe. We'll call it Universe A. How did it get this weird name? Ong's Hat, yeah, we were just talking about this in a previous episode. I don't know about you guys, but I love ridiculous town names. I love like being on a road trip and running into some place called Give Up, you know?
There's also Weed, California, which is a fun one.
Yeah, and Ong's Hat is part of a long tradition of weird names for small towns in these United States and in Canada as well. But there's a bit of folklore about the etymology of this town's name, and there are many different versions of this. There are like 4 primary versions. There's one kind of myth-busting version we'll give you toward the end of this. But let's talk about the fun one. Let's talk about the Jacob Ong. What's his deal?
While it wasn't invented, he was a guy who would have consumed a lot of Cavassier. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He was a ladies' man. Sorry, that just dates me. Wow. I'm old. Making SNL jokes about the ladies' man. Okay, but yeah, Lothario, right? This guy, he enjoyed women, and he also enjoyed his hats. Specifically, a silken hat. Very, very nice hat. And the way the story goes, at least the one that I've heard, is that he was in a bit of an argument, let's say, with one of the people with whom he was keeping company, and he threw his hat, landed on a tree, and it became Ong's hat. At least that's what I've heard, Ben. What have you heard?
Well, there are a couple similar versions, right? There's another version. Let's go with the hat throwing. There's another version that he was out, wooing the fairer sex, as they would say back in that day, and he had some haters, man. He had envious suitors who had lost the game of love, and one of these haters, grabbed Ong's hat and was like, "You stink, you're a rake," and he stomped on it and he ruined it, grinding it into the mud of the Pine Barrens. And then Ong saw that his hat was ruined, and so he frisbeed it up high in the air. Fiddle-dee-dee, you can't stop me. And in this story, he speaks in rhyme, I guess. And it latches onto a very high branch of a pine tree, which, they're everywhere. It's the Pine Barrens. And no one could reach it, and there it stayed for years and years and years. And it became, because it was such a distinct hat, it became a landmark there in the woods for people. And they would just start referring to that area as Ong's Hat. This may not be true. There are other versions, like, the one you mentioned, that he threw it while he was courting, right? And there was no envious lover involved. Then there's the idea that he had a tavern and he put a little shingle out that had a hat on it, and then the town became named after the tavern. But we're telling you this historical context to let you know Ong's Hat is perfect casting for a conspiracy theory location, for a setting, because it already has always been associated with uncertain narratives and unreliable narrators. Later, in fact, in the New York, I think in the 60s, a descendant of the Ong family, Ong was a kind of common name in New Jersey at this time, apparently, in the 1700s. But in the 1960s, fast forward, a descendant of the Ong family writes to the New York Times and says, "Look, these legends are fun, but that's because they're legends." He says, really what happened is my family was involved in the grain trade, and we were transporting grain. And then the trip was long enough that we needed a midpoint, or a way station, a resting place. And so we built this hut so we could crash with the grain and make the trip in a reasonable amount of time. And he said this was originally just called Ong's Hut. And for some reason, over the great game of telephone, it got corrupted into Ong's Hat. That's an understandable thing, and that person seems to have some credibility because they might have access to oral memories or oral retellings that non-family members wouldn't have. But that's the point. people have been saying conflicting things about this for a very, very, very long time. And if you are familiar with deep internet lore, don't want to date anybody, but if you're familiar with the days when not everyone was on the internet, you may have heard of Ong's Hat in a very different context. It's a story of mad science, alternate universes, and conspiracy.
Yeah. Does anybody out there remember BBSs? Well, those were fun. Sort of Usenet, early news groups and internet bulletin boards and all of that. It was like pre-AIM. This is like Prodigy. This is earlier than that. No, this is back when I think it was Usenet situation. The first tale of this conspiracy emerged on one of those internet bulletin board systems. And also there were, zines, which were kind of like DIY publications that folks would print and distribute, photocopy. And that was the way a lot of people got their like new music news, any niche kind of interest. You would probably be on a bulletin board, or if you didn't have the internet or live somewhere rural, these zines, you could like mail order them and stuff. It was important. So according to this tale, Ong's Hat only appeared to be a ghost town. In 1978, there was a guy named Wally Ford who bought over 200 acres of land in this area and built an ashram that became quietly popular among those who kind of knew that world, particularly Princeton physicists who were looking for safe, secret places to conduct experiments that wouldn't be allowed in, say, their the halls of knowledge with the oversight of the brass and things like that, with prying eyes looking in on their work. So we're talking here about quantum physics specifically, things like chaos theory, multiverse type stuff, interdimensional travel.
Yeah. And we have to point out what we're saying here, all this stuff about a person named Wally Ford, the human being Wally Ford. This may or may not be fictional. This is part of the story of Ong's Hat, right? So the human being named Wally Ford who bought 200 acres of land and built an ashram may or may not be real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll address that first, but that's a great point. Right now, folks, consider yourself sitting around with your pals, your old droogs, around the campfire, and we're just strangers sharing a story with each other. So yes, once upon a time, these Princeton scientists found an intersection, possibly a very ancient intersection, between what modern humans recognize as science and what modern humans recognize as spirituality, as ancient wisdom. And they wanted to unlock the powers of the human mind, just like various other conspiratorial groups of mad scientists in the world of fiction. They thought we can blend these ancient learnings from this ashram and its leaders. We can blend these with bleeding edge science, with our theories that would get us blacklisted from the Ivy League. And we can, using these two sources of knowledge, train human minds to eventually not just access alternate realities, but to manipulate the nature of reality itself. And you'll see why this is so interesting at the end of today's show, at least in this universe. So, right, we've got this set up. They continue, and sometime in the late 1980s, they built something. They called it the Egg. If you are a fan of fiction, if you're a fan of like the psychic experiments that have been conducted by various entities, or you enjoy fiction like Stranger Things, which is a love letter to a lot of these sorts of stories, then you'll be familiar with the idea of a sensory deprivation chamber. Sensory deprivation chambers are super cool. I'm a fan of them. Our pal Robert Lamb from Stuff to Blow Your Mind, also a big fan. Their egg was special. Their egg would help them originally determine the exact moment when a wave becomes a particle. And, that's something that physics has been wrestling with for quite a long time, right? And it's neat, right? That's cool. That's neat. Why wouldn't Princeton let you do that, at their spot? It seems like that would be amazing science. Anyway, so they thought this was neat. They're doing this bleeding edge science. And one day during testing, the egg disappears for 7 minutes with someone inside. Now, what happens during those 7 minutes in the lab? Lost to history in this universe. I got to stop saying that, but it's lost to history in this universe. Luckily, the egg reappears. 7 minutes pass, comes back. The test subject is in there, and he's got a whale of a tail because he says he saw something.
And we'll tell you what he saw right after a word from our sponsor.
He says, I went to another dimension. He's freaked out. For 7 minutes, according to this anonymous test subject, he was in a world that appeared just like Earth from Universe A. He claimed it was, except for one important difference. It was void, as far as he could tell, of human life, any signs of humanity. And the scientists were gassed. This was a huge breakthrough. So they started experimenting, or they continued experimenting in secret, seeing what they could move through this gateway that they had created / found. And according to this story, we're just giving the high level parts here, but according to the story, they, through no real fault of their own, ran into trouble with Uncle Sam. There was a nuclear incident nearby. And so the all-seeing eye of the government was applying closer scrutiny to this area. And they started to notice there were strange things going on in this little ghost town, Ong's Hat. So the heat was catching up with them. They could feel it around the corner. They said, we can't give up our research. It's too important. But we can't stay here. We've got to relocate. We've got to find somewhere else to go. And eventually, perhaps out of desperation, they turned to the Earth in Universe B. And piece by piece, the story goes, they slowly moved the entirety, not just of their lab, but of the ashram into this alternate Earth. Eventually, they were gone entirely, leaving nothing but that humble little hut / shed, the gateway between worlds. And if you catch them, if you happen to be in the area at the right time, maybe when the stars are right for the Lovecraft fans out there, you might see them traveling back to good old Universe A. They only come when they need to restock supplies, lab equipment, quesadillas, shoe feet, you know.
Dipping sauces.
Yes. Dipping sauce. I love that. Universe B does not have habanero avocado ranch. Guys, someone's got to make the trip.
Yeah, it does feel weird that you would move your scientific operation to a place that doesn't have resources at all. I mean, it would have endless resources if you could build the things to collect those resources, right? You can't build much computer equipment in the universe with no humans.
Right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And that's one of the reasons why time travel questions so often have bad answers. You know, like if you traveled back in time to AD 1200, even when there was a ton of technology around, you'd be surprised how useless you would be in a lot of respects. Most people, you know what I mean? But you would still have some superpowers. You'd be immune to a lot of stuff. It's something to think about. You make a really good point because it would be starting from scratch. This story is bonkers. It's exciting. It's cinematic. I'd love to see it depicted on stage, on screen, any size screen, really. And this is a conspiracy theory. It has all the ingredients of a kick-ass campfire tale. It reads like an episode of Fringe or Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone. But is it real? Some people would respond by saying, what do you mean by real? Here's where it gets crazy. Okay, first off, all right, just universe A, brass tacks here. This is absolutely not real. This is so absolutely not real that it's been proven multiple times. It's not real. It is the creation of several people. I would say its present form is mainly the creation of a writer, a punk guy who loves computers, a transmedia artist named Joseph Matheny. He loved culture jamming when he was growing up. He loved the kind of contrarian intellectualism of things like the Church of Subgenius, which we're fans of. Yeah. And I guess can we do a quick description of Church of Subgenius, just for any uninitiated?
Yeah, it's sort of like a joke religion, a joke cult, but also to be taken pretty seriously, depending on who you are. Its deity or overlord is J.R. Bob Dobbs, who is basically like a piece of clip art from the 50s that's like a kind of a, a husband kind of with a pipe, sort of like a everyman, kind of like, workaday Joe in the 50s, the American dream kind of scenario. And they believed in some occurrence, some sort of apocalyptic / rapture event called X Day, when some manner of aliens or some manner of extraterrestrial beings are going to swoop down and, bring all the subgenius up to wherever with them. And they celebrate it every year. But the joke is that Bob Dobbs, got the date wrong, one of those things, and then he keeps promising that it'll happen in a different year, and then that keeps getting extended. But it's all very tongue-in-cheek, and then they believe in a concept of life called slack, which is how they live their lives. Sort of a do what thou wilt kind of Church of Satan vibe, but a little more wacky and nudist and weed smoking and, Devo listening. It's a lot of kind of weird hipster, hippie, Burning Man type folks. I hope I did an okay job there.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and he also, Matheny, that is, was also into the philosophy of Discordianism. These are both subgenius and Discordianism, both mix true and fictional events or beliefs to create alternative histories and aggressive reframings of current reality. Or I guess perspective shifting, paradigm shifting, culture jamming. We were talking about Discordianism earlier off air in a way, because we were talking about the Illuminatus trilogy. If you're a fan of that book, then you know that a great deal of it is concerned with Discordianism. There are practitioners of Discordian magic, chaos magic, whatever you want to call it. Joseph Matheny loved this stuff. He loved this stuff. He hung out with intellectual sets of people who had the same somewhat esoteric interest, many of them from different eras of time. There were some older people. There were some younger people. They had any number of other unrelated interests. There were scientists. We'll meet one in a second. There were writers. There were artists. You name it. They're just people who like to have really interesting thought experiments. If you're listening to this show, and if you've listened to us for a while, then it's safe to say they're the kind of people you would probably like to hang out with. They're fun to talk to. Their minds go weird places. And Ong's hat became an example of this. The first iteration of this story was something, it was not even really a short story. It's presented as a brochure, a nonfiction work called the Institute of Chaos Studies. And you would have first seen it in a magazine called Edge Detector in 1988, which I just realized now is supposed to be an edgy name. I didn't realize it was a pun. It's like we're right on the edge.
Edge Detector, like an edge lord. He detects the edge, and then he kind of edges up against the edge, but he never really quite exceeds it.
I can see how that title pulled people in. Right, the concept of pushing everything out until you reach the edge, find where that edge is, just find it so we know.
Yeah, and originally when this is published in this magazine, it is attributed to a guy named Peter Lamborn Wilson, who also goes by the pseudonym Hakim Bey. He is his own episode. He's far from a perfect person. He's actually intensely problematic in some ways. But when he talks about this originally, he says, look, I didn't write this. I found this. I'm just passing it along. And that's an important part to building a mythos. You know, the original author should be anonymous, or they should be driven mad, or they should be dead. You know, that they need to somehow be distant, right? And that's why so many works of prophets throughout time have been, you know, when they're in the written word, you'll usually see the prophet saying, I'm not making this up. I have received this from somewhere else. You establish a chain of metaphysical custody. It's quite clever, and it works very well. So later, by the way, it would turn out that Wilson would say that he wrote the original story. All right, so where does Joseph Matheny come in? Well, as we said, he liked to hang out with a crowd interested in esoteric things. He knows Peter Lamborn Wilson, and they are friends with a guy named Nick Herbert. Nick has the same interest. He's also a smashing conversationalist. They have a great time together. But Nick is also a scientist, a credible scientist, and he is known in his scientific field. He is the one who says, let's add some, you know what I mean? Let's add some modern science to the myth. Let's make this science fiction and fantasy. And then, you know, Peter and Joseph, we can only assume, are like, heck yeah, man, hold my Discordian beer. Let's get cracking. In 1989, they started reproducing this edge detector article, and they literally Xeroxed it. They just made physical copies, and they started pamphlet bombing places where they thought interested folks would find it. So, you know, imagine you're walking into your local coffee shop, and maybe it's just pinned on the physical bulletin board, the predecessor, the internet bulletin board. And so you see like Lost Dog, you know, fencing classes, learn judo or whatever. And then a concert is coming up, Devo, why not? And then there's a catalog, or there's a little pamphlet that says Institute for Chaos Studies. What are they selling? They don't look like they're selling anything. So you read it, or you find it at a concert venue, anywhere they thought a curious person might run into this. Matheny loved the idea of popularizing this, of propagating it, and he thought of it as, he described this in an interview with Gizmodo. He said it was, you get the sense he thought it was all in good fun, right? We're culture, we're doing pranks. Who doesn't love a good prank? Well,
yeah. Think about it. At this point, there's no tie to revenue, personal revenue for anybody who's distributing this thing. They're not making any money. They're losing money by printing this thing and taking it places. They're losing their time. Like the goal here, you can tell, and it must be, it's not making money. It is, or, you know, trying to profit in some way. It's that thing that you just said, Ben, propagating this concept for funsies / chaos.
It's not about the money. It's about sending a message, right? So, yeah, he called it a, quote, mind-expanding in-joke for goth kids, stoner gamers, and sci-fi loving computer nerds who like talking about physics and telling spooky stories. I feel attacked. I'm kidding.
I mean, a little bit. I think we all do.
But they started also expanding this through the postal system. You know, it reminds me a little bit of The Crying of Lot 49 by Pynchon. Matheny and Herbert and Wilson were mailing this thing to people, and you could find it mentioned in other catalogs or distro list. Like if you were reading, for instance, publications from UFO interest groups, in the back of those, you would see like other stuff you could request through the mail if you were interested. And you would see something like this, Institute for Chaos Studies. And then they started producing their own thing, the Incunabula catalog. Matheny says he and Nick, the scientist, started really going nuts with this. They were going hard on the paint with the idea at this point. So he took this one piece of fiction and he grew it into this entire alternate world online. It expanded in a crowdsourced way, similar to SCP. And our friend of the show, Matt Riddle, if you're listening, thank you again for introducing me to that time vampire. I enjoyed it, but I've lost so much time in there. So go to that rabbit hole if you've got several hours. But anyway, so this is kind of like how the Lovecraft mythos expands. You know what I mean? At this point in time, the majority of stories in the Lovecraft mythos, if you count everybody after old H.P. Sauce himself, there are more authors in the Lovecraft mythos who are not Lovecraft than the guy himself. That's amazing crowdsourcing. What's the quality of the stories? They vary, but there are some real amazing ones. And anyway, it's a more recent example would be House of Leaves, the collaborative novel that was originally written online. And itself is also a very weird read.
Isn't that the one with like the swirly text and like the weird marginal things and Easter eggs abound, that kind of deal?
Yeah, exactly. Primarily by Mark Z. Danielewski, I think. Anyway, that's a great read too. But no, at this point, it starts becoming a thing where you're not quite sure who is writing this, who is actually creating this. You're not quite sure where the first story comes from. And you're starting to wonder who added what? Has this been edited? Some of this appears to be true, you say. There is a place called Ong's Hat. What else is true, right? And not everyone swallowed the tail hook, line, and sinker, of course. But the thing is, a lot of people read about this or some literature associated with it, or they saw a comment about it and they started thinking, what if, the government of the United States and Princeton had gotten up to some weird stuff before.
Well, yeah, we talked about nuclear contamination or some kind of nuclear accident that occurred near where Ong's Hat was located, as that was part of the lore, right? And it was revealed later on, there's a New York Times article you can read about this, that there was nuclear material or radioactive material that was released and kind of covered up and made hush-hush for quite a while that seemed to line up with the timeline here of when they were doing stuff in the 60s. You can search for old missile site at McGuire is still tainted, Keene says, on the New York Times. It's a story from 1985, and it's just weird how stuff like that seems to match up with the tale, right? It's like finding the actual real world things that match up with the ARG elements. And there, around that time, it's it's weird to think, but Project Stargate is actually happening within the CIA, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there are actual government experiments with remote viewing and stuff happening around this time. And a lot of that stuff is rumor, but it's not well known by people in the United States, but it's stuff that's written about in these kind of magazines and pamphlets that are going around. So you can totally see how this tale seems to match up with real world stuff, including the government's shenanigans.
Absolutely. Oh, and I want to make a quick clarification here. I believe the brochure that ended up circulating, the one that became really popular, was eventually called Ong's Hat, the Beginning. The Incunabula Papers, Ong's Hat and Other Gateways to New Dimensions. You can find it on archive.org. It's a first-person investigation is how the tale begins. But you're absolutely right, because along with those true things that are happening that seem to fit the Universe A timeline, there are also lots of references to books that don't exist, right? Books that if you searched for them, you wouldn't be able to find them, at least pre-Amazon, because there's a thing that happens on Amazon now where someone will create something that purports to be one of those books from fiction that doesn't exist, and you can buy them if you want, right? But they're usually just terrible cut and paste jobs. I haven't read every one of them, but you have to watch out. So anyway, at this point, you can say that a book exists, and short of going to the Library of Congress, it'll be kind of difficult for most people to prove that it doesn't exist. They don't have the access to information. There's no Wikipedia bibliography or no easily searchable online database. This is, in short, beat me here, Paul, it's a mind of an extravagant and extreme degree. It's similar to the initial reaction to the Blair Witch Project. And when this came out, we were all film goers. I think it's safe to say, guys, we all knew or knew of some people who initially thought the Blair Witch Project was a real deal documentary. Do you guys remember that?
Well, yeah.
I think I went in thinking that. I saw it in the theater and it was packed. That was such a hot movie. I mean, yeah, you're right. It kicked off this like dream genre for Hollywood because the movies cost pennies to make. And if you market them right, they do incredibly well. Cloverfield's another good example. That one wasn't pennies because it had like big VFX budget, but that was another one that had some pretty cool viral marketing behind it. I think we've talked about a few times with all the like adjacent like Slurpees and stuff and like all the Easter eggs of the thing falling out of the sky. I really quite liked that movie a lot. But yeah,
the point,
Blair
the point
Witch.
here, Blair Witch, the like you said, the marketing told you it was real. It was found footage, right? This is actually found footage from something that went wrong. Come in and watch what went wrong. You get to watch it with your own eyes. Like that. I mean, it was brilliant. It kind of stinks because weirdly enough, Blair Witch is probably one of the small handful of things that started making us question reality, including The Matrix. You know, like things that made in popular culture, it was cool to question your own reality. And we're seeing, you know, going back to the 80s now, late 80s, early 90s, when questioning your reality and like multi-dimensions, multiverse, all of that stuff, it was on this track that was building and building and building and building. I love that you put Blair Witch in there as an example, Ben, because I feel like that's another one of these milestones that leads us down this path of uncertainty.
Right. There is no spoon, but there is an Ong's Hat. It's in New Jersey again. But well, there's an Ong's Hat Road. I didn't see Ong's Hat. I saw Ong's Hat Road. Ong's Hat Road Ong's Hat would have been visible in maps around 2006. Probably be the last time you would see it.
Oh, okay.
Because now it's just ruins. But Ong's Hat Road, I think the name changed at some point.
Okay.
If you look,
you can
Google,
see. I looked up on Google. You can find Ong's Hat Road. So I guess that the name of that one changed. That one's near Southampton Township, kind of between Southampton and Pemberton Township. And the place where I said the nuclear, materials and leak, that's in Jackson Township. If you're looking in New Jersey, just if you're looking at your map.
Yeah, or if you're in the area, you want to drive by Ong's Hat Road, which, as we'll come to find, people have done without a sense of satire, with their tongues firmly not in their cheeks. They have done this. So this is weird because people are believing this. They don't necessarily have all the tools to question it. And Matheny is having a fantastic time with this. He is building out lore left and right. He assumes the persona of this investigator, and this investigator is just a guy, just an everyman audience perspective, right? That is diving into the story of Ong's Hat, and he publishes new milestones in his investigation, like chapters in a book. And these new revelations always lead to more details, twist in the story, different rabbit holes, different little pieces of string to follow along from point A to point Z. And this continues. People are enamored of this. They're in, and they want to know more about interdimensional travel, right? There are people who are talking about how they're worried about this investigator's safety. You know what I mean? Maybe he's trying to find things that don't want to be found. And that's still not the end of the story, because we're going to get to a strange and dangerous metagame twist after a word from our sponsor. All right, we're back.
And now we're going to talk about what happens when enough people start believing in your story that you know isn't real, but you're having a whole lot of fun making it. What happens when enough people think, oh yeah, I'm going to go to there. I'm going to find that. I'm going to learn these secrets. I'm going to get the truth out of people who worked on this or know about this.
Dun, 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 dun. Yes, yes, Q Hall of the Mountain King. Things start to get out of hand. The lore is expanding in depth and reach. The scope is, as Homer Simpson would say, embiggening. And more people, like you said, Matt, begin to actually believe the story. They struggle, and in several cases fail to separate fact from fiction. Eventually, this leads Matheny to pull the plug. Now, look, the whole time, in his defense, and this is true, this is Universe A true, the whole time in his defense, if you did some digging into the story, you would recognize in-jokes, you would recognize little narrative loop-de-loops, things like that. This guy, what we're saying is this guy was having what was sometimes described as a collective legend trip. You know, let's tell a story together. Let's play a game. Hashtag no saw. And this idea, from his perspective, I just want to be clear, he wasn't doing anything sinister. He wasn't out to make a ton of money. He wasn't trying to change people's behavior in a dangerous way. He wasn't trying to start a cult. None of those things that people do when they attempt to manipulate folks. He wasn't even really trying to manipulate folks. And you can see him in interviews over the course of this expansion where he's like, yeah, this is fun. We're doing this because it's fun. I love Discordianism. I dig chaos magic, or chaos theory, I think you would have said. And so people are refusing to believe him. Eventually, this does, as we said, lead him to pull the plug, and he goes in another interview and he says, look, again, for anybody who somehow hasn't heard me say this before, this is a game. The purpose is to have fun. There is no universe B. That's basically what he's telling people. And there's no real egg, no alternate Earth. Just guys learn about postmodernism. He's saying that's what we're doing. We're playing a surrealist game. But
it was too late.
It was too late. It was too late. The lid of Pandora's jar had been unscrewed, and folks said, well, from their perspective, it's also understandable if they thought there was a conspiracy afoot and they believed this story. They said, someone got to you, man. You're either a patsy or you're the victim of a cover-up. Tell us what's really going on. Blink 3 times.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Ben.
Right.
Somebody's making you say that. Mm-hmm. Somebody's making you say that, right?
He was tapping. He was tapping on the table, I heard, during the interview. I think it's Morse code. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, dude, it's the agents of order. The agents of order got him, right? Because that's part of the whole backstory is that there are those who want full order. That is the way to control the universe. That is the way things should be. And others want chaos, which is much, much more freeing. And if the people want order get to you, then you have to say what they want you to say. Dude, it's just so interesting how that could function. Guys, I think this would work with any cult where the founder of the cult comes forward towards the end of their life and says none of this is real. I think the cult would still sustain itself in the belief that it is real. And for some reason, the leader had to say that or chose to say that for some reason. But the core values of that cult remain. I think that's just my theory.
I 100% believe that because it makes sense from what we understand about human psychology and their cognitive capabilities. People love a good sunk cost fallacy. Your brain is wired to feel good if it feels like it's always been right about stuff. And your brain is wired to react with hostility to the idea of being wrong, even when you intellectually know you are wrong. You know, if you had been, and the rules of this, the constraints, the parameters are so arbitrary. Like it's as simple as, let's say, laws of ethics for human experimentation don't apply. You can do whatever you want. You know what I mean? It's the Wild West again. Let's say you take some kids and you raise one of them, the experiment group. You raise one group just to know, for various reasons, that blue is the best color. There's a hierarchy of colors. We're not explaining any of the other ones. There's a very particular shade of blue. That is the best color. Everything in your young life is associated with that. And then we just let you out in the wild where you learn that other people have other colors they like. And then you find that the rest of the world, the rest of the human population says, well, yeah, some people have favorite colors. Some people don't really care. Some people are colorblind. It doesn't matter. Like blue is no more important a color than the other colors. This would feel...
I disagree.
Right, this would feel blasphemous. Even if you intellectually recognize it, I posit that those victims of that incredibly unethical experiment would still, in some part of their mind, be like, these people don't know what they're talking about. Blue is best. The bib crew. But like, I know that's not a perfect example, but it's just to show how arbitrary this is. And this is a real problem. It happens in the realms of politics and policy. It happens, it's similar to a sunk cost fallacy. It happens sometimes in belief systems. Like you could make the argument, a lot of ex-Scientologists make the argument that people stay in that organization because they'll get blackmail on you, but also because they don't learn about stuff all at once. You're paying every step of the way with time, with the bridge. Yeah, with the bridge. You're paving the bridge brick by brick with stuff that you can't get back. So at the end, everybody wants to think of themselves as a smart, rational actor, and usually that's very true. So your brain gets in this paradox state where it says, wait, I'm smart, I'm rational, I must have done this for a reason. Also, by the way, while we're throwing out hacks, that's the reason the Ben Franklin effect works.
Is that the one with the key? You get struck by lightning? No.
It's the one where if you want someone to have a more favorable opinion of you, you ask them to do you a small favor. Make sure it's small and easy to do. The scope of the favor should be something very easy to say yes to, because for most human beings, what will happen is they will retroactively rationalize why they helped you. They'll rationalize the reason, and they'll say, I helped because I am a good person, but I also have good taste. So you must be kind of a good person too, because I don't help bad people.
Nice.
It's not 100%, and don't ask for anything crazy. Like, don't say you listen to stuff they don't want you to know, and now you're going to go ask a stranger for their car or their children or something. Ask to borrow a pen. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Or like, if you must, like a large scale thing would be like a ride to or from the airport. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's a big ask, man. That is a big ask.
It depends on where you live. If you live in New York, that's like a huge favor.
I think a ride to the airport is less of an ask than getting picked up from the airport. Because there's a lot of uncertainty in getting picked up from the airport. You got to wait in the cell phone lot or just circle indefinitely. Who knows how long it takes to deplane these days.
Yeah.
It all just depends on what time it is, guys.
Also true.
Does anybody really know what time it is? I don't know. That's an oldie song.
I can tell you what time it is for today. I think it's about time to wrap this episode.
We're close. Yeah. So this goes into, I wanted to mention something else here. So not only do people refuse to believe him, but they begin harassing him. Not everybody, but some people begin harassing him. Phone calls, letters, doxing. Folks are showing up to his house, saying, I know what really happened about the cover up. Teach me the secrets of interdimensional travel. There's another analog to this, a predecessor in the world of fiction. It's a book called Foucault's Pendulum. In Foucault's Pendulum, spoiler alert, here be spoilers, 3, 2, 1, spoils. So the author of Foucault's Pendulum, Umberto Eco, tells a story about these very high-minded literary nerds who begin making their own conspiracy. And they know they're making it up. It's a thought experiment for them. But things get out of hand. And folks start accepting this and behaving as though the conspiracy is real. And then if people are behaving as though a belief is real and is factual, then it gets a little closer to the truth, doesn't it? Because their actions, however motivated, are still indeed real actions, right? They weren't imagining themselves showing up at this poor guy's house. Anyway.
Well, I was just going to send people over to Gizmodo right now. You can read an article titled Ong's Hat, the early internet conspiracy game that got too real. It's written by Jed Olbaum, Oelbaum. And in this, you actually see an interview with this person who created Ong's Hat, or was part of he was the person who popularized it.
It's his last interview.
And it's it's allegedly his last interview because he's so tired of talking about the dang thing and he doesn't want anybody showing up at his house anymore.
At the time, he said it was his last interview. That's the way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the article we were mentioning at the top. So thank you for citing that. That's probably the best one-stop shop to look at analysis of Ong's Hat outside of the game. But again, you can read the majority of this stuff, like the in-universe stuff here, and you are not going to be alone in reading it, because a lot of folks who are students of gaming have read this, and they've read it because Matheny was able to, for the most part, extricate himself from all this harassment. But if you go to the right forums today, you'll see people who still believe that it's true. And a lot of folks admire this, and rightly so, because it's a prototype. It's a predecessor of alternate reality games, ARG, right? Which is everything from LARPing to stuff that skirts the line of fact and fiction for folks, just like John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness or Ong's Hat. So I just rewatched In the Mouth of Madness. So
I watched it recently too. I think it holds up. It's a little goofy, but it's fun. Oh, it's so fun.
I really dig it. Yeah. I feel like maybe, well, some more spoilers. Maybe at the end they shouldn't have shown the monsters as much. That's where it really kind of dropped out.
Well, especially if you're watching a more recent scan of it, where it's a little higher def and you start to see the seams a little bit more on those rubber costumes. Back in the day when it was pure film, there's that blur that kind of, it makes it where that stuff gets a little bit washed over. But yeah, some of that stuff, when you watch it on TV and like higher def, it's a little bit, little funny looking.
Yeah, but still a great story. And Ong's Hat is a great story as well. It is a tale of fiction. It is also a tale of metafiction, and it's a story about a game. But on the meta level, it's a story about a conspiracy to create a conspiracy that met with massive success, and perhaps success that foreshadows danger in the future. Like we were saying, you can read all about Ong's Hat today on your browser of choice. It is an in-depth look at how disinformation, even the wackiest kind, can spread without being seriously questioned. And this is an important parable for the modern day. It's only going to become more important as the years continue on. Ong's Hat is a fictional story, but it's also a real harbinger of the so-called post-truth world. So be careful out there, folks. This is not the only example of this. Obviously, we're fans of this kind of stuff, but it can be like playing with live fire if you are, you don't know who's going to read it online. You don't know where their headspace is. You don't know what opportunities or tools they have to question things. So I would not be surprised if there are many more examples of something like this to come. We want to know what you think. What are some of your examples? What was your experience with Ong's hat? Did you hear about it back in the day? Did you know people who fully believed it was true? And if so, what do they think now? Can't wait to hear from you. Let us know. We try to be easy to find online.
That's right. You can find us on Facebook, where we have a Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on Twitter. See where that company's future's headed. That's worth an episode, huh? Man, that Elon Musk sure knows how to troll and flex on like everyone.
Or pump and dump.
But it's yeah, exactly, pump and dump for sure. But for now, Twitter is as you expect it, and you can find us there and those other places under the handle Conspiracy Stuff. On Instagram, we are at Conspiracy Stuff Show.
If you don't like social media, instead, why not give us a call? Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname. Let us know if we can use that name, your voice, and your message on the air. Then you'll have 3 minutes. Say whatever you'd like. We can't wait to hear your stories, ideas for new episodes, comments on the previous episodes. We want everything. Call us. Let us know what you think and how you feel, and how your cat's doing. How's your cat? Is your cat doing all right? Why not?
Literally everywhere.
That's true. I'm sorry.
Well, mainly in the boxes, but
yes. And if you don't want to use your phone for whatever reason, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.